we can move current events somewhere, but there's really not another good time. And so the suggestion, I think there are only 15 people in the 10 o'clock water aerobics. If you don't like the current event topic, go swim. I could say go fish. If there's a topic that you really want to be in and you're in that 10 o'clock hour, maybe try to get to a 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock class. Does that make sense? Because apparently that's an easier solution than moving current events. The concept today... Hold it up, Harry. And when you drop it down like this, your breasts don't speak. The concept today is the idea of a panel. And what we're going to do is go from Carol on my right across the table, and they're not going to talk for very long. The idea really is more to get a conversation going, for questions to be asked, and for all of you to participate in this. The subject is really Florida today. Starting with Carol, she's going to give us a little background and talk about DeSantis as governor. And then we're going to go to two of the current topics about actions in Florida, both the legislature and the governor. Carol Lee is going to talk about the anti-riot legislation, and Jeannie's going to talk about voter restriction legislation. I don't know how many of you received the second email, but that legislation passed just night before last or last night. One of the two.
Last night.
You didn't get it?
Yes, I got it.
You just sent it
Mea
out.
culpa. I'll make sure that I've got your correct email.
You just sent it out.
I just sent it out there like at 12:30 or something. And then finally, Don's going to wrap up and talk a little bit about the prospect of DeSantis as presidential candidate. He's listed on all of the lists that are being made right now and for some time as number one if former President Trump doesn't run. And with that, Carol, you're on.
All right. Can you hear me? First of all, I feel like you'd like to know where somebody's coming from who's speaking to you or supposedly giving you facts. So let me say that I am a conservative and I do like DeSantis. But I am not a political activist, but I feel like that with Bob being the leader that he is, he needs any of us, when asked, to help him because it's a tremendous job every week to get all this information and all together. So this is why I'm up here. Ron DeSantis is the 46th governor of Florida. After graduating from Yale University and then Harvard Law, he served as an officer and attorney in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, U.S. Navy. He served for 5 years representing our 6th congressional district, that's here in Ponte Vedra Beach, in the U.S. House of Representatives. While there, he was a staunch ally of President Trump. He is now the youngest governor in the United States at age 42. At one time, he lived right across the street from Vickers. He had good credentials to become governor and had done his homework on who is his base and where that population lives and works and how to address those needs to get votes and support. Those constituents seem to be the well-heeled, lots of retirees, educated, and they lean conservative. He addresses his agenda to meet those needs. For example, working to have 65-year-olds and up vaccinated even before essential workers. He wants the state to be attractive to residents and specialized tourists, such as golfers and spring breakers. And in case you don't know, tourism brings 100 million visitors to Florida annually. To do that, he feels he has to protect Florida businesses. Therefore, he is unashamedly on the side of business and commerce and pounds the business drum. This is when he got in trouble with COVID. He made a calculated determination to stay on course and not shut down. This is when his favorability ratings dropped. Despite his pro-business efforts, the state is still facing a $2 billion budget deficit, so that many things, such as 3 new toll roads for infrastructure DeSantis signed into law, may have to be sidelined. The closing 2 years of his term will continue to be shaped by the economic fallout and recovery from the pandemic. Strategically, he feels we are in competition with other states such as Texas, who also have a good climate, are business-friendly, and have low taxes, so has to remain competitive. His favorability ratings are, with several polls, between 51 and 64% currently. Now, as far as some of the things he has done in these 2 years, it was not clear to me. Some of them, it said he had signed the bills, and then it said he introduced the legislation, but I couldn't find any place in the time that I had that said the legislation was in effect, so you'll at least know where he's coming from if he endorsed it. He filled 3 vacancies on the Florida Supreme Court, shifting the majority from liberal to conservative. He replaced the entire South Florida Water Management Board, and after creating new posts of Chief Resilience Officer and Chief Science Officer, no policies thus far have emerged to reduce emissions or deal with the rising sea levels. He signed a $2.5 billion executive order for water quality and Everglades restoration work, signed an executive order calling for the end of Common Core in Florida. He signed an anti-sanctuary city bill into law. Florida became the 12th state to adopt legislation to require local governments to aid immigration enforcement efforts. He signed a bill requiring government employees and private companies that contract with the government to use E-Verify, but had originally called for all employers to be required to use it. Legislation drafted by DeSantis seeking to protect Confederate monuments, permit the state to overrule local government's decisions in reducing funding for police, waive sovereign immunity for municipalities, thereby allowing local authorities to be sued for providing inadequate law enforcement, and block people injured while participating in protests from receiving damages. He announced his support for legislation to crack down on economic espionage by foreign countries such as China, and supported legislation to crack down on big tech and prevent political censorship. He is getting ready to sign a bill expanding private school vouchers. That was in the Wall Street Journal this week, and that's going to be big. The other panelists will discuss the latest legislation.
Thank you very much. I think that's a lot, and I think it's fair to say one of the things I want to just add from a perspective that's, generally speaking, a little different from Carol's. I think that history is going to record that DeSantis probably had this COVID thing pretty close to right. Address the population that is at greatest risk, make sure we're protected and vaccinated, but try to leave the economy pretty much intact. It surprises me that there is this big deficit, but I'm sure that has to do with the fact that so much of our state income is tourism, and you can do whatever you want to do here, but if people can't get here, they can't get here. But otherwise, it's a pretty straightforward Republican set of policies, whether it had to do with immigration or education or climate change, municipalities and their laws. Thank you very much. That was an excellent survey. Do you want to do questions now between things, or should we go across the table first? It's
across the table.
Across the table first. Carol Lee?
Okay.
Can you hear me now? I can hear me now. All together. I investigated the Anti-Riot Act because I thought it was really important for all of us to know what was in it. And I just want to give you a little background first. Interesting information about the bill in Florida. It's titled Combating Public Disorder Act, CSHB 1. And Governor DeSantis started promoting it in September 2020, before the election in November. And so I looked up what was going on locally that precipitated this. And there was a riot after George Floyd's death. There were protests. And the largest protest in Florida was in Orlando. There were about 3,000 people. And it did turn violent after dark. It was peaceful until dark, and then apparently a group of people started looting. And in Jacksonville, we had the second largest protest of 1,200 people. And again, after dark, it started getting a bit violent, and they started attacking cars and police and so forth. And that was on May 30th of last year, after George Floyd was killed. And Governor DeSantis brought out the National Guard. On May 28th, he deployed 700 National Guard soldiers. The interesting thing is that they were, the part about voting, which Jeannie will get into, is limiting voting, although Trump won Florida by 371,686 votes, 51% of the vote. Excuse me. No fraud was ever found in Florida. As a matter of fact, Governor DeSantis bragged that it was the gold standard of voting, as we heard from Vicki Oakes when she was here. And according to State Senator Jeff Brandes, who is a Republican senator, the single Republican senator who voted against the bill, he said not one Republican supervisor of elections supported this bill. And we heard that from Vicki Oakes when they tried to ban the drop boxes. That was originally part of it, and then it was changed to only have drop boxes during early voting hours instead of 24 hours. I think Jeannie will probably talk more about that. And Vicki Oakes had told us that none of these supervisors approved of that at all. Sorry. The bill was introduced by Senator Dennis Baxley of Lady Lake, who said it was needed because things, this is a direct quote, things could happen. Not because things had happened, because things could happen.
Carol Lee, you're stealing Jeannie's thunder here.
What?
Can you stick on the riot bill and not steal Jeannie's thunder? You're talking about the election bill, right?
The voting regulations, yeah. Well, this is part of the bill.
The anti-riot bill?
Sorry, what is it?
Are you talking about the anti-riot bill or
Yes.
the voting bill?
The anti-riot bill. This is the anti-riot bill.
That restricts voting?
That's where all the drop boxes, etc., were
Those are
included.
two
Yes.
different bills, but leave the voting thing to Jeannie if you can. I'm just trying to,
I'm just talking about the parts that are in the bill.
Okay.
I'll read you the bill exactly.
I thought there were two different bills.
Sorry.
Moving right along, let's go ahead. Keep going, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Go on. There was I think you all saw the picture of Governor DeSantis signing the bill in a closed room with all white men and one woman in the room, and there was a black legislator who was trying to get in, and the guards dragged her out. There was a new word that I had never seen before called doxing in this bill, and I'll read you the exact bill. And doxing means to search for and publicly identify information about an individual with malicious intent. In the law, electronically publishing someone's personal information with the intent that the person would be threatened or harassed. And this is a new crime that was just developed with this law. And I'll read you the exact parts of the law as well. Wait 1 second. Do I need to stand this up or just? Not now. Okay. The law says that a person commits a riot if they willfully participate in a violent public disturbance involving 3 or more people. 3. Act with the intent of helping each other in committing violent and disorderly conduct. Cause injuries, property damage, or imminent danger of body injuries or property damage. The law creates a charge for aggravated rioting. A person commits aggravated rioting if, while participating in a riot, they participate with 25 or more people, cause great bodily harm to someone not participating in the demonstration, cause property damage in excess of $5,000, display, use, threaten to use, or try to use a weapon, impede the movement of a car on a street or highway by using force or the threat of force. This was changed. Originally, they gave immunity to anyone who drove into a crowd of protesters. And there was a lot of discussion about that, so they changed it. The charges and penalties for the crimes are enhanced. This was a big part of the bill. Anyone arrested on charges of battery, aggravated battery, burglary, and theft at a protest that turns violent can have their charges enhanced by 1 level. In other words, a felony goes up to a second-degree felony. Protesters cannot post bail, and this is a big one, until after their first appearance, which could take as long as 24 to 48 hours. And that's a problem for people who work because they cannot post bail for 24 to 48 hours, so they miss work if they have it. There is no mob intimidation allowed. It makes it a first-degree misdemeanor for a group of 3 or more protesters to use violence, which I mentioned before. And there's drivers can still a driver won't have immunity against prosecution for hitting a protester with their car. Of course, this goes back to Charlottesville. But they have some level of civil protection. If a driver feels threatened by a protester and runs them over, the law provides them with some defense mechanism if they sue. There's a mandatory minimum sentence. If a protester is convicted of battery on a police officer committed in furtherance of riot or aggravated riot, they'll be sentenced to a minimum of 6 months in jail. There is no destruction of memorials or historic properties, and this is something new. Last summer, 7 people were arrested for vandalizing a Christopher Columbus statue in downtown Miami. Under the new law, anyone who damages a memorial or historic property would face a 3rd-degree felony charge, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The law makes it a 1st-degree misdemeanor to publish someone's personal identifying information, and that's called doxing. And so they softened it a little bit, but not a great deal. Still severe penalties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeannie? And you can clarify if I'm mistaken about the 2 acts. I think there's the Anti-Riot Act that was passed and signed by the governor a couple of weeks ago, and then the Voter Restriction Act that was just passed by the legislature last night. Jeannie, why don't you go ahead?
Well, Carol Lee has covered a lot of the important... No, we just had a little crossed-wires, no problem. Anyway, the Florida Voting Rights Law, which has also been called the Florida Restriction voting rights law was passed yesterday, as Bob said, and it has been very, very vigorously debated for a long, long time. And there are people that contend that it was designed to disproportionately affect black voters and other minorities. And so the background on this is that after the 2020 elections, Georgia originally enacted a law very, very similar to the one Florida has passed, and it was condemned by lots of large corporations. The baseball group thought they hit a home run, and they took the All-Star game out of Atlanta because of this law. So, and a number of people have presented law cases, have started law cases against the validity of the law, and they have also stated that Florida will be included in these law cases. So having seen what a swell reaction the law received, Florida decided they couldn't do without a similar law. And the law covers a wide range of voting regulations, but I'm going to concentrate on the restrictions on drop boxes and voting by mail. These are the two methods mostly favored by black and other minorities. They have great problems in terms of struggling with transportation, and many of them have jobs that have hours at all times because they're connected to the service sectors, etc., and their accessibility to the poll booths are very, very limited. So the drop boxes are the method of choice now. After the election 2 years ago, when DeSantis won by a very, very small majority, and the post office was found not to deliver lots of ballots that they should have in time to be counted, people began to depend more on the drop boxes. So the law particularly affects the drop box availability. And they've done various things, such as limiting the hours that the drop boxes are available from the entire 24 hours a day to just early voting hours. They are requiring that all the drop boxes be monitored by a supervisor from the election group. Some of the election supervisors have said they just don't have the budget to supply such employees, and they would have to eliminate the drop boxes if this became a firm stipulation. So, and other things that they have done, such as they have minimized the number of people that can deliver, how many votes they can deliver to drop boxes. And our own Joan Brander here, who has admitted in front of all of us that she brought a number of Vickers votes to the drop box, would definitely be in very serious trouble. So you have to watch yourself, Joan.
I will.
Okay.
But I'm willing to go for a second offense.
Okay, all right. All right, and then the other method that is very popular with people who have all these time restrictions, etc., is the vote by mail, and they have also put serious curtailment on that, and they have increased the identification requirements in order to be able to vote by mail. And whereas previously, once you got certified, it was good for 4 years, Now it's only going to be 2 years, and then you'll have to apply again, and this will affect all of you here too. So, anyway, the important thing to note is that although the purported reason for the bill is security, all the lawmakers, as Carol Lee said, agreed, both Republican and Democrat, that no fraud occurred in 2020. And Florida was called a gold standard for the whole country. Also, not one Republican supervisor supported the bill, and critics have said that it is a solution without a problem. And that's it.
Thank you very much. So we've heard about an excellent, I thought, all three of you have been superb in describing your topics. You know, and I have to say, I was talking to somebody in the hall about the anti-riot bill. It seems to me so troubling, the things about it that question our right to assemble and make felonies out of misdemeanors, which leads to the same thing. But I also I just abhor violence. I abhor the violence that goes with it. I can't believe that they're looting. It seems like every protest becomes a license to loot after dark. So I understand the antipathy people must have toward that kind of activity. The riot bill troubles me, though, nonetheless. Vicki Oakes, I thought, was very good, Vicki Oakes, on her description of this legislation, saying that all 67 commissioners had opposed it when it was still in draft form, and we're surprised that we had to go through with it. I really do think it's a problem without a solution without a problem. That said, DeSantis is really a popular governor. As Carol pointed out, he's done a lot of good things, and a lot of people in this state like him, and he's getting national attention, which takes us to Don. Everybody's talking about him as the candidate if Trump doesn't run. You're on.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I have 3 comments I'm going to make before I start my 5 minutes, if you will. I'm very pleased to be with these 3 distinguished, knowledgeable women. I've been used to being with knowledgeable women, having produced 4 daughters who are in their senior years now, and many are retiring. It's a pleasure being with you. Number 2, I'm following a comment that Forrest made many meetings ago. And he said with some pride, he was a registered Republican and has been all of his life. So have I, and I still am. But up to the election of Mr. Trump, my wife and I had never voted for the same presidential candidate together, with one exception, Dwight Eisenhower.
I can say
We just did not see eye to eye on leadership in the country. And with that, I'll keep it within 5 minutes. DeSantis as president, it's a very broad, complicated subject. I really feel that I need more of a fortune teller or a Ouija board, or maybe I should even have tried to call the Oracle of Omaha, who's great on finance and politics. I mean, he has opinions on all of these things. All of us can only do one thing. We have to try to evaluate the candidates, and in this case we're talking about Mr. Governor DeSantis. We have to evaluate the candidates on what they have done, what they hope to do, and what they will do. First, as was pointed out by our first speaker, DeSantis has a wonderful resume. I mean, education, political experience, country service, You can't beat that. That's a very high recommendation. However, in 1918, when he won the governorship, they had to recount the votes in a couple categories. He won by 0.04. 0.4% of the casted votes. He may have a little more favorable position now, but when he was campaigning against a black mayor of Tallahassee, he only gained by 0.4% the election. Guns. He's recently approved that you can have open pistol at your side if you have a permit. You can carry it into church if need be. Foreign affairs. He seems to agree pretty strongly with Trump, and he has been asked the question, is there anything that he can name that he would not approve that Trump has done? And he thought for a moment apparently and said he couldn't think of anything. Now COVID-19 is another subject we should be evaluating in relation to his potential presidency. He dismissed the Florida scientific people that were on board by his former governor, which was Rick Scott, another Republican. He dismissed those and appointed the scientists that were more attuned to his personal thinking and his personal approach. Since then, he's, as has been mentioned, he's wants to speed up the cruise business, opening up the harbors, getting the cruise ships back, but they don't have to, they shouldn't check the validity of the vaccine that any of their potential customers have had. There is no passport, there is no proof required, as he sees it, for the cruise ship people. There's no proof of vaccination. He, as I think you all know, has pretty well rejected the face mask scenario, but fortunately we here in Vickers are still admonished to wear it when the distance is not adequate and we're within the buildings itself. Education, we've talked a little bit about that. He's expanded private school vouchers. There is one thing that is very much in his favor, though, and that is he's indicated major raises for teachers, but to the best of my knowledge, that has not been passed yet. And we'll have to see. Climate change. He has created a new policy in the state with a head called the new Chief Science Officer 2 years ago when he came in. As has been mentioned already, there has been no reduction, no legislation proposed for the reduction of emissions or the major problem that faces Florida, which is the rising seawaters. Voter registration, you've heard about that. I can't add more to it than that. DeSantis for president. He has two hurdles. First of all, he must be reelected, I would assume, as governor in another 2 years. And in 3 or 3.5 years, then he has to be nominated before we can consider him for president. An interesting survey was done by the Conservative Political Action Conference, which is a Republican organization, shows that DeSantis, oddly enough, was tied with Pence for being the next president, if Trump does not run. And of course, Cruz was very close behind him, but still behind. Sometimes presidents have a way of surprising us, favorably and unfavorably. I think of Harry Truman. When Roosevelt died, everyone was sure the country was going to go to pot. It didn't happen. Eisenhower, which I mentioned earlier, really wasn't the political man, and yet he's the guy that put this country together with our interstate highways and has really brought the whole country together. And President Johnson with his civil rights, he was lousy on his Vietnam program. He just didn't follow things up. And as we have found out by Amy Cho, we've been guilty of that for many years now. This will be up to you if DeSantis is president. You'll be one of 1,600,000 voters that will cast the vote for the next president. And I think most of us, hopefully, will be here in another 3.5 years. But we don't know. Now's the time to be critical, each of us, with the information that we have. Don't be afraid to find new information. And don't be limited to what your tribe recommends. Tribes sometimes can be wrong. Fact check things. Don't blindly just repeat anything. Use all the news sources. To Bob's credit, I had never seen this before, but he distributed this, I think, on our second or third meeting. And it's a great reference point as to where various news sources fit in the program of politics, left to right. You have the center, you have the right, a little bit right, and you have the far right. You have the left, a little bit left, and the far left. A great thing, and Bob, I would suggest that for those that never got it, we should repeat this and send it out as fast as we can. And last, I'll leave you with my favorite comment of all people that tell us or suggest to us how we can evaluate things. Stephen Hawkins said that intelligence is the ability to accept change. Thank you.
All right, let's give a round of applause. Thank you all. Sit right there. Thank you all. I got to tell you that it's so easy to think about what it would be like to sit on a panel in front of a very friendly and open and discerning audience. But it's frankly quite daunting, I think. I don't know. So great credit to the four of you. Questions? Comments? So, I'm going to hurry, or I'll go back here, Sally, and take it. I'm a runner just today. Sit to the cup right here, Sally Ann.
Yeah.
Who raised their hand?
Who's going first? Sue? Ladies first, Sue?
Yeah, ladies first.
I'm asking the audience here, what do you think the chances are that this ridiculous voting repression act is unconstitutional? I have a feeling that it's strongly unconstitutional. And Don, thank you for your very, very anti-DeSantis Republican viewpoint.
I hope it wasn't too anti.
It was wonderful. Huh? I know, that's why I said it.
I'd be interested, excuse me, Sally and Bob. Bob, you raised a question that none of us here have raised. Can I see a raise of hands for those that voted for DeSantis the first time?
Voted for DeSantis for governor against that stellar moral character, Mr. Gillum.
How many would vote for DeSantis in 2 years as governor? Raise your hands.
How about modifying that question just a little bit, Don? How many who didn't vote for him the first time will now vote for him the second time? So nobody's changed their voting thus far for the first 2 years?
Depends who's running
Before
against
Forrest, we get a question from Ken, Sal. Sorry. Ken, why don't you ask your question?
Okay, well, I wanted to ask something about, make a comment about the anti-riot bill. But first I have to say, I wish some of my golfing friends over at Sawgrass could hear the presentations that you guys made this morning. It was very impressive. Now, we don't need any outside consultants. You guys did a great job.
Yes.
The only comment I was meant to the anti-riot bill, I knew nothing about the details, so I heard Carol Lee. I wonder, why do we need a bill? Isn't all of those things a crime to begin with? That's all.
Caroline, you want to address that? What new crimes were created by that bill?
Sorry, I can't.
What new crimes were created by the bill, the anti-riot bill?
Was created by the Yeah, there were 2 new crimes that were created.
Here's your mic.
There were 2 new crimes that were created by the bill. One was this doxing, which is identifying someone, particularly on the internet, and giving out their information publicly. And the other one, no, I forgot. I forgot to mention before that there are 2 federal suits against this anti-riot bill that have been brought by an attorneys group that is a nonpartisan, supposedly, group. And there are 2 people expected to have some changes made in the bill as a result of that. And I did mention there were 2 crimes, didn't I? I know one was the doxing, and let me find my paper and I'll tell you exactly. Okay. Sorry. Want to come back to me?
Yeah, let's go for it.
That was a whole new word to me. I had to look it up.
Don, I have a question for you and the audience. If we're going to raise our hands, I think it'd be very interesting to look back at DeSantis' first election and remember who his opponent was, Andrew Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee, which is a very liberal city in Florida, I might add. But he also had a pretty notorious background of how he got there in the first place. And right after the election, he was found in a hotel room, heavily drugged, with several naked women. And I wonder how many people would vote for DeSantis again versus Andrew Gillum. It's just a choice.
I don't think Andrew is going to run again.
I doubt it. I want to point out that's the problem with the Democratic opponent.
I just want to add something for us. If I'm ever found in a hotel room with naked women, I hope to hell I'm drugged.
In response to Ken,
Microphone? Yeah.
in response to Ken, one of the most terrible parts of this anti-riot bill is that a lot of misdemeanors have suddenly been called felonies. And then on top of that, when people are arrested, they are very often put in jail for a minimum of 24 to 48 hours without bail being accepted. So that means people can lose their jobs, etc. And they can be fairly innocent people, but just be there. and be arrested and thrown in jail for 24 to 48 hours.
It seems like a pretty big bill just for those two items.
Apropos that, I was very proud that I had 2 grandchildren, 1 daughter-in-law and 1 daughter who participated in the riot, I won't say riots, in the demonstrations back in the summer. I don't think I would certainly advise them now, if this law is passed, to avoid demonstrations, so that I think the proposed law accomplishes the wishes of those who proposed it in cutting down on the number of demonstrators in the demonstrations and leaving out those people who are well-meaning at trying to make a political point, because the risk of being jailed, as Jeannie says, for 24 hours is greater than most people would be willing to take to make a political point.
Now, just to add to that, one of the things that I think is really onerous about this is to elevate the crime from misdemeanor to felony. If you're found guilty of a felony, forget running for office in your whole life. I think there are restrictions on your ability to vote initially until you try to serve your time and the recent law. But the difference, we used to talk about this to kids, teenagers, who'd say, they could steal little things and it doesn't matter. An iPhone is worth what, $800 or something like that? A felony is $300. A kid who steals an iPhone has just changed his life. Imagine going to a protest, an innocent protest, and changing your life, never being able to run for office. I mean, what it does, what a deterrent to protesting, to expressing your will.
What is the status of the bill right now? The bill was passed immediately and signed into law by Governor DeSantis. The other crime that was created was the destruction of memorials or historic properties. Sorry, I got lost in all my facts. Anyone who damages a memorial or historic property would face a third-degree felony charge, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And as you remember, or you may remember, there was a statue of Christopher Columbus that was vandalized. And now that can go up to 5 years in prison. Governor DeSantis signed this immediately. And the thing is that the legislature, I think this is the last day of the legislature today, and then they recess for the rest of the year. So things had to be passed immediately.
So it's a done deal?
Yes.
Okay, so
except for the suits against
what recourse do people have, or the people who do not like this bill, what recourse do they have?
There are 2 federal suits against it that are pending. That one came out about 2 days after the bill was signed.
Carol, you want to say something from the table? Go ahead.
Yes. It seems to me from what I learned in doing this, that DeSantis is staying true to his colors. He's very pro-business. He beats that drum all the time. He doesn't want these stores to be looted, the businesses to be ruined, and he wants this to be a safe place for tourists to come because that's one of our main businesses. So, I mean, it sounds to me like no wonder he did what he did, because he's staying true to his policies. Whether you like them or not, that's what he's doing.
I assigned Sally Ann the long walks because she's getting knee replacement, so she won't need that knee.
What if an 8-year-old, or 10, let's say 10 years old, what if a 10-year-old went and defaced a statue just out of the lark? Would he be considered an adult? Or would he be considered
Juvenile.
The major?
That's vandalism by juveniles.
Juvenile court.
That's
I'm
BJ.
sorry. I'm sorry.
It's vandalism by a juvenile. Are there any lawyers that might even be a judge in the back row? Jack, do you have any idea what happens when a juvenile does a crime? Canadian?
You would go to, in Virginia, you would go to juvenile court, and they would treat him without going to jail, most likely. Very seldom does a juvenile go to jail in Virginia.
What about if it's a felony?
Felony, he's going to be treated just like he or she will be treated like anyone else. So even though a juvenile.
Yeah, that's the danger of elevating crimes from misdemeanor to felony, is that you suddenly expose the guilty person to, you have to think long and hard before we make things felonies. And I'm afraid, personally, and again, I say this adamantly opposed to any form of looting or violence. I just abhor that. But I also think free assembly has to be allowed.
But what the judge is saying is a 10-year-old charged with a felony would go to jail. To jail. I mean, that's extraordinary. It must be a different category.
It's a juvenile jail.
Was it a juvenile jail?
It's
Okay.
different.
So it's like a reform school or something.
I'd like to come back, if you can, just a second to the concept of DeSantis as president. The things going for DeSantis are, first of all, Florida is a really important state. I think second to Texas as among Republican states in terms of electoral votes. So this is clearly an advantage over Vice President Pence and over Cruz, I would say. Do you want to say something? Second thing I was going to say is that compared to the alternatives, he's pretty impressive.
Well, listening to all this discussion, here to me is the big problem, and I don't know how we solve it, but what happens with peaceful demonstrations, just as Carol Lee said, after dark is when the problems start with the looting and my feeling is that these people who start the peaceful demonstration are very much legitimate. They usually have gotten a permit to do it. They are following the law and they have the right to protest. The problem is they attract the hoodlums who all of a sudden say, whoopee, now we can join in after dark and cause all kinds of problems. And they really don't give a hoot what the people are protesting. It's just another opportunity. I don't know how we solve that.
We could say that anybody carrying a gun on their hip can't come to the demonstration. That was a joke.
There was a major effort in both Orlando and in Jacksonville to keep the protests peaceful. And when most people had left, they were just, they said about 200 people in each case were left behind and they committed the acts of violence after dark. So we have no idea if those were the peaceful protesters or they were not. But there was a major effort made to try and keep it peaceful.
Why can't demonstrations be restricted to daylight?
Right.
I mean, a time frame, a curfew, right?
Okay, you have a question?
That's a good
Hang on.
Why don't they pass legislation that says that permits cannot be given after dark, period?
There was really no mention about permits, but the difference in this law is that if three people form together, this is considered a riot. If they show any signs of violence or perhaps brandish a gun or any weapon, 25 people make an aggravated riot, and the penalties become quite severe.
So that the riot in Gillen's hotel room was not aggravated. There were only three.
As I said before, this is a done deal. So we can talk about it a lot right here, which is very interesting, but it's a done deal. The question I have is, what kind of influence will this have on other states? This is passed. Will other states be encouraged to do something similar? Will they do it to the extent that Florida has done it, which is fairly extreme, I think. And that, I think, will have a large part on which way the country goes.
Well, basically, Florida followed Georgia, Iowa, Arizona.
That's in
and I
voting,
think
though,
a couple of
not in
other
writing.
states in some of these procedures.
In voting.
So this is going on in quite a number of states at the time. But there are lawsuits against it.
But not in the rioting, Carolee. I think in the voting, they're going with other states. This rioting thing is different. It's a comment. What do you suppose DeSantis thinks about January 6th?
No, I mean, you don't.
Panel, are you hearing that? She can't hear.
Initially, he said that it was against the law and that he was negative on it, but since then he hasn't commented on it at all.
You mean he didn't think it was Antifa folks dressed up as Trump supporters?
He indicated that it was a crime against the government. He said it only once, and then he has not commented on it since then.
Perfect.
It looks like we've just about perfectly used the time. A big hand for the panelists again. Thank you very much. Good stuff. There are about 20 topics floating around for next week. I want to, and I'll throw some ideas out in the next couple of days. But another question I want to ask is how you all feel about summer current events. Should we suspend for the summer months? Should we go to every other week? So maybe you want to give me your feedback. You all have my email address, so please comment. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a good week.